Hi, my name is Jennifer Palmer, and I'm the owner of Nourishing Journey. I spent many years dealing with chronic health concerns, and I used to be a computer programmer, and I was told that my health concerns were pretty much the way it was going to be the rest of my life. And I didn't really want to hear that. So I went on a mission trying to find anything and everything that could help me feel better. And not just me, it was for my family too. And I did find some answers. And honestly, I feel better now than I have ever felt my entire life. You can feel this too. People that you know and love can feel this. You can heal. The body knows how to heal. We just need to know how to unlock it. And while none of us have all the answers, many of us have many of the answers. There's many, many, many things you can do to help your body, mind, and spirit. So we're just here to give you some of the different answers. We hope that you enjoy these roundtables. We're going to be covering a lot of different topics. And the goal is just to try to help you see that there's possibilities. But if you think that we can be of service to you, and if there's any way that we can help you, there are links in the description where you can contact us. And we hope to hear from you soon. Enjoy. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our roundtable today. And today we are going to be talking about relationships. And as our wonderful expert speakers that I brought with me today, I have Karan Almond and Lisa Morrel. Karan, why don't you introduce who you are and your expertise?
Okay, well, most people who watch us know me, but I'm an oral systemic consultant, which means I work with people on the relationship between their dental and their systemic health because there's a very entangled relationship there. And from doing that, I kind of then realized that there's some issues that other people need to work on in terms of toxins and their gut health. So that's been incorporated. So that's sort of the health consulting thing that I do. But in the process, over the last 7, 8 years of doing that, I realized that there is always, always, always an emotional trauma block component that goes with chronic illness. So I looked at a lot of different systems and I chose to incorporate human design as the thing that resonates most with me because it really focuses on the individual and not everything outside of the individual. So I'll be sharing a lot of that today.
I love it. I love it. All right, Lisa.
Good afternoon. I'm excited about this topic. It's my favorite topic of all time. I've been working in the behavioral health field for 30 years, and that's kind of how relationships came to be my favorite topic because it's always woven in when you're doing counseling work. I also went to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in New York back in 2006 and got my certification in holistic health, which is my other great passion. So I've been doing health coaching since 2007, life coaching since 2004, and doing relationship coaching now after, as I said, the 30 years in the behavioral health field.
I love it. I love you both so much.
I love you too.
Yes, you guys are amazing. Like even just beyond your profession, I enjoy you guys both so much. I wanted to talk about relationships because all of us have to deal with it. All of us are in relationship with somebody, even if it's just within ourselves, but usually we're bumping up against each other trying to figure this thing out. And there's a lot of different ideas about what relationships are about. I like the more spiritual type of understanding, so I'll be bringing some of that in along with Karan. And I know, Lisa, you've got some other ways to approach it too, as well as spiritual. And I think we're just going to have a great conversation today. But, I just want to start off with what each of you thinks relationships really are about. I'm going to start with Karan. What do you think they're really about?
So, what are relationships really about? To me, relationship is about the experience of somebody to mirror ourselves back to us. And so, as I look back through my life of relationships, I had difficult relationships, very difficult relationships. And I'm 62 now, so it took me a lot of years. I'm a slow learner. But I began to have to look at, well, what's the common thread? And I found out I am the common denominator. But then, then what I learned is like, oh, but I'm doing it wrong. I didn't have all the information. I didn't know how to do the relationship thing, because I was leaving either me or the other person out and not looking at how the energies change when they come together. So for me, the person is always, for me, a mirror.
What about you, Lisa?
Yes, similarly to that, I think it is partly a process of discovering ourselves. And along with that is growth. For instance, they say if you really want to get a good look at yourself, a long-term partnership or marriage, you're really going to be looking at yourself, because you get that mirror, as Karen was saying, reflected back at you. And then another thought that I have been giving a lot of thought to lately, I heard that when you think about grief or bereavement, the loss of somebody, the quote was that actually what you're grieving is your loss of connection to source, because you were kind of experiencing that through the person that you lost. And that kind of opens up a whole other dimension of relationships to me, if I'm thinking about it along those lines from the spiritual perspective, that wow, this is like every relationship that you have is also kind of an experience of your connection to source. I mean, that to me enlarges it so much more. And it was really eye-opening for me. So I'm still kind of ruminating on that, because I just learned that quote about a week ago.
Even just sitting here thinking about that, I'm tearing up. Like, I love that. I love that. Well, the only other thing I think I would add to both of those comments is, I really do believe that we have more than one lifetime, and that, a lot of times our relationships are helping us burn through karma, and they are karmic in some way. And so we are working through our stuff, even if it's past lifetime stuff. And so I don't know, I think that's another really valid reason why we have relations with somebody. And so you chalk all that up together and create this beautiful, messy package, right? So
yeah, well, that also explains why not all relationships are meant to be forever. Sometimes people just waltz in and they give us the greatest gifts, and even if it's painful when they waltz out, we can look back and go, man, but look what I learned. Look where I got to.
Yeah, sometimes the hard way though, right? Because
It is the hard way, but I do things the
easy.
hard way, so I'm that's where I'm expert. I'm expert on the hard way.
Me too.
Well, I think a lot of us could say that we can relate to that comment, because the hard way is we have so many blind spots. I don't know that it's like we choose the hard way, we just don't always see our blind spots. So hopefully today we can provide some opportunities for people to see some of their blind spots. I remember when I was in college, I was dating somebody who was a little bit possessive, and I was so grateful that I was given a project in my criminal justice course to research. We had to do a research paper, and I was given domestic violence. And so I started researching, and I found all these warning signs, and I was like, oh, wow, that really sounds like this person I'm dating. And I really feel like it was God, spirit, universe, creator waking me up to, okay, pay attention, like these things are happening. And it did, it became violent. But I never would have guessed it. It wasn't even an awareness for me. I was really blind to it. So I love having conversations because it helps people see what may be around the corner for them in some way, in some topic. So I really want to start off with, what are some of the downfalls that you typically see in relationships? And I'm going to start with Lisa with that. Like, what are the things that people really struggle with?
I mean, that is a very broad question, but I would say that, I think a lot of times people bump up against themselves. And so in all relationships, projection is something that is in play, right? So the things typically that frustrate us the most about somebody else, often, I don't want to say always, because there's always caveats, but there's always exceptions, but generally the things that we are struggling with may be something that's a disowned part of self. or as you said, a blind spot, something we're not seeing in ourselves. And so it is a big frustration. The person may be mirroring it back to us. Kind of related to that, I was thinking about how typically in the beginning of a relationship, there'll be something about another person that's a big attractor, a big draw. And then ironically, paradoxically, as the relationship progresses, that very thing that you saw as such a huge positive when you first met the person can actually become something that drives you crazy, a big problem in the relationship. And again, I always think about these relationship issues. And in my own experience, one thing that I've come to realize is that I believe the reason that that is you see it initially because it is a very big part of them. And usually there's a positive, and that's what draws you. But there's always a downside to everything. Even if you're into health, you can take it too far, right? We know this. It's now in the DSM diagnostic manual for people who are
I would so be labeled right now.
Yeah, probably all three of us.
Right.
So you can take anything too far. So like, let's say, you have a love of family, but you can love your family so much that it actually gets in the way of your relationship, right? So typically the things that we get frustrated with are those things that they may be such a big part of your partner that they're actually out of balance. And so then it becomes a source of conflict.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you have to add, Karen?
Well, anything that I say today is probably going to be coming from a human design perspective, unless I say that it isn't. So I'm just going to caveat that because it doesn't mean that I have it right. One of my sayings is there's more than one way to skin a chronic illness. And so there's more than one way to deal with a chronic problem. So this is just how I tend to view it. There's something in human design called amplification and distortion. And I started following Barbara Brennan over 30 years ago. And that's where I was introduced in some workshops to what happens to the energy field around us when we come into the energy field of someone else. And I understood it sort of from this mechanical place back then. But it wasn't until I began understanding the real uniqueness of how we're designed and how we have different activations. And so for somebody who has what we call an undefined emotional center, if they're in connection with somebody who has either a defined emotional center or when they come together, that emotional center becomes defined because their energies together, and it's very complicated, but just trust me, when they come together, it becomes a defined emotional center. And so when you have a defined center, you have a fixed and consistent way of handling things. And I got to see this in action in my own relationship. My partner and I could not be more opposite than we are. Like, we were truly a universal match. We would not have chosen each other. It was the timing and it was what had gone on, and now we choose each other. But back then, we were brought together. And what I have watched happen with us is I handle things over here with my friends and other people very differently within myself. And he does too. But when we come together, there's this very fixed way that we become emotionally. And if we're not careful, we amplify and distort that energy to the point that we really can't hear each other because the definition of the emotional center for both of us is very foreign. And so we tend to think it's the other person that's activating when actually it's both of us that are activating. And so when I look at relationship, I don't do a lot with my clients in terms of adult relationship. I do work with them through human design on parent-child, because how we parent our children based on their design can significantly impact how they deal with everything as an adult. And so there's a conditioning process that happens. And so the biggest thing that I see when people talk to me about their traumas and the problems that they're having with people is they are typically trying to be something that they are not. They've been programmed to believe a certain thing or to see things a certain way. And Unfortunately, our society, we're very externalized. So we tend to look at the other thing or person in our immediate environment. And so I tend to try to look at it as a way to bring people back to what is happening inside of me. And if I can't figure that out, I had better get out of the other person's energy and get, back in touch with my energy so that I know what's me and what's not me. Does that make sense?
Totally. Absolutely. Well, I would like to say too, when you're talking about triggers and distortions, we all have distortion. I want to make sure everybody understands that none of us see everything clearly. In fact, most of us don't see anything totally clearly. We have these blinders and then a foggy glass that we're still trying to see through. And the more wounding each person has, the foggier the glass and the more narrow you see things. So the more healing you get, the more you can see and the more clearly you can see what's happening in a relationship and the more clearly you can see yourself. And so I wanted to make that point too, so that people understand, like, this isn't something you're stuck with, these blind spots, you can learn to see them. And then the triggers, I found not only are we mirrors for each other, but oftentimes I think because of the karmic relationships and the soul-based relationships that we have these contracts together where we come in to help the other person grow or heal in some way. And so it might not necessarily be, let's say you're dealing with somebody who has an addiction, maybe you don't have an addiction, or maybe you did in a past lifetime, and maybe you're burning through some karma, dealing with the other side of things from that addiction, or maybe you're meant to just learn a lesson around it or help them learn a lesson around it or grow in some way and come together. And I think some of the keys in navigating relationships is trying to figure out, okay, well, is this a mirror situation? Is this a lesson? Is this karma? What's going on here? Because the quicker you learn it, heal it, or clear the karma and like really get it, the faster you can get to the other side. And I've seen relationships make huge turns because somebody's healed something. And then all of a sudden that issue that they were so struggling with isn't needed anymore. So I think, the healing, the idea of all of that and understanding your triggers and your distortions and how you're seeing it is such a big thing, and is a big part of navigating any relationship, I want to talk a bit about, when do you know you should stay in a relationship and work through the stuff, whether it's yours or somebody else, and how do you know if it's yours or somebody else? And then when do you decide to leave? Not that we can give that guidance to anybody from a video like this, but when someone's in process and they're trying to navigate a relationship and figuring out, when do you actually leave? When do you stay? And push through, like really push through and grow from that to bring it to someplace you're meant to come to, if that's what you're meant to do. Lisa, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So it's kind of two different questions, the first one being distinguishing if it's your own issue or if it's a problem with the relationship. So I think, sometimes it can be a little bit of both, and then it's extra complicated. But I would say it starts with tuning in. And, we here may think it's so obvious that you need to learn ways to tune in with yourself. But I never like to assume the people I'm talking to are familiar with that process or do that. So I would just caution that I think that's where it starts, is learning to tune in with yourself. Before you make any hasty decisions about the relationship, because it may just be something that you need to work through within yourself, and or get a coach or a therapist or something like that. Outside help is always helpful. Then in terms of the larger question of when it's time to leave or not, obviously we all go through struggles. Sometimes you may be in a relationship with somebody who's going through something like you referenced, addiction or depression or some or grief or something like that. So your role may shift in that partnership as one of a support person. And so in those cases, I think you would want somebody to be there for you. So if you really care for the person, there's that kind of that patience and that recognition that sometimes we trade off on these roles. But then again, at the same time, people have different timetables. And so I think back to a couple I knew, and the woman was frustrated because she was dealing with a depressed partner. The partner had lost his father and had been in a clinical depression for 4 years. So she decided, I'm out. I've been patient. I want to get on with my life. And so she left the relationship. And that was the kind of thing I thought for a long time. What would I have done in a situation like that? Obviously, it's very individual. So I think that led me to a long answer to your question, Jen, which is that, at least for me, and I think that this is probably some good advice, I think you always want to see both people doing their best to care for the relationship as well as for themselves. So after a period of time in a situation where, like somebody who's in a clinical depression, yes, you have your own journey or something you're dealing with, but at the same time, the relationship is a living, breathing thing that needs to be watered like you water a plant, and you need to be able to contribute to that. So I think even if the person can't pull themselves out at that time, if they're making efforts, meaning that person is in therapy and they're trying to work through their clinical depression, in the example that I shared, if somebody's making an effort, for me, that might be enough to stick it out and see if we're going to get on the other side of this thing. But I think part of the reason these questions are challenging is because relationships are so different. And that's why I'm a big believer in coaching, because, even a relationship issue can look different a year from now than it looks today. So having that outside guidance can be really helpful. And it's also so fascinating to hear your perspectives from the more spiritual side of things.
I love it. What about you, Karan?
So I think my perspective is that, and I'm sure Lisa just didn't touch on this, but I think it depends on the kind of relationship. Is it a intimate love relationship? Is it an employer relationship? Is it a parent-child relationship? And because human design is such a vast, it takes 4 years to become an analyst. So it's just so vast. I think probably what I'm going to do is try to focus more on like how it's personally worked for me, because if I try to explain it any other way, it's not going to make sense. I am what they call a profile 3, and it's about bumping up against life to see what doesn't work so you can figure out what works. So it's kind of a backwards way of doing things, but I can tell you that it is how it works. It's not something that's in my head. And once I found out that that's a real thing that happens to some people, I had so much pressure relief. It's like, oh my God, no, I'm not supposed to know what I want. I'm supposed to figure out through experiencing life what I don't want. And then I know what I do want. So you can call me Liz. I've been married 3 times officially and into almost, may as well have been married relationships. I've been in a lot of relationships. In a intimate relationship, I am not typically a runner. I am somebody who will stick it out because I was raised in a Christian family, and you don't leave. And the wife, I was raised in a very, traditional kind of family where the wife did the kids in the home, they didn't work and all of those things. And of course, I'm also designed different than everybody in my family. So I failed at all of the ways they told me that I was supposed to be. And when I say failed, I didn't fail. I just failed at their paradigm. And so as a line 3, I will either hang on to things for too long, or I will let them go too soon, because that line 3 is also about making and breaking bonds. My design in life goes back to something that one of you said. I forgot what it was, but basically I'm the pot stirrer. When you were talking about the person, Jen, who, agrees to hold a certain role for another person, that doesn't always feel good. I am the person who, without even knowing it, will get into people's triggers. I don't mean to do it. I don't intend it. It just happens. It's like this internal guidance system that takes me to this place. And frequently, it serves the person I'm in the relationship with, but it hurts me because they end up needing to leave. They can't stay with me. It's like they got to where they needed to go and now they need to move on. And that has been a pattern in my life. And until I figured that out and realized, oh, this is a thing, this is your job, this is what you do. Now I just think it's great when it happens because I'm like, okay, another one down, next one, come on in. And that's how it works for me.
Boy,
But
I'm
I
getting really
had
good
to
at this.
in my current relationship was the first time I was a runner. And for the first 2.5 years, I kept coming to this point where we would hit this impasse. And the only thing I could figure out is we're not supposed to be together. We're not supposed to be together. And Jen, I don't know if it was you or someone else, but one of you said to me, well, how do you know that now is the time to leave? How do you know that you're not supposed to work through this before you leave? And that hit me. I was like, oh, and that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. And things have just smoothed out in a way that it's been unimaginable for me because instead of looking at what was triggering me and trying to figure it out and go, oh, the traumas and your traumas and how and doing all that, all I did was stick with my design and what my strategy and authority tells me to do in every given situation. And many times, what it actually tells me to do is keep my mouth shut. It's not speak what I think I know or what I think I've figured out, is to just be quiet and let the universe do the work. And if I'm invited to say something, then I can, and I can affect change. But if somebody doesn't invite me and I try to insert what I think I know, it goes sideways every time. And so that is not everybody's human design. That's mine. And I have a very, well, let me put it this way. People who've been doing it for a long time will look at mine and go, oh, girl, because it's one you have to kind of learn to love. And there
Oh,
are gifts in it. And so my point with the human design is that once you know what your design is, then you know your strategy and authority for speaking, taking an action, and how you respond to your external environment. That's why that became my chosen thing, because I wasn't responding to my external environment very well. And I was not even paying attention to my internal environment. So I was living this completely incongruent life, like total incongruence. And then I got sick. Of course I got sick because I wasn't living true to what, and when you start living true to that, you do lose relationships, because you become who you really are and not, what you're trying to be so that you're accepted. But what I have found is that, yeah, I lost a ton of relationships in the last 3-4 years, but even family, but I have gained things that I don't believe I would have gained had I not gone into this space of being okay with being me, whatever the consequence of that is.
yeah, that's interesting. I know I've had so many people tell me that, because I've had people come and go out of my life, I've gotten really used to, especially as you grow and you become almost like a different person in a way, because you've healed those wounds, that person does not fit the need anymore. And unless they heal too, they don't really come with you, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But, I'm not somebody who tends to give up on people very easily. I tend to have people in my life. I don't hold on to them. I don't do that. And I've had people say that I do, but I don't do that. It's really just, no, they're doing them, I'm doing me. And, as long as there's something here that we're going to get from each other, okay, unless it's really toxic and painful or something. But even then, I'm probably still going to be like, all right, I'm not going to give that relationship a lot of attention, but I am going to process in my own being what I need to get from this, because everything that's happening outside of us, including in relations with somebody else, it's really about what's in us some way or another. And the sooner we get to that root issue or core of what we're trying to resolve here, it's gonna be either with this person or the next, so you end up like in this cycle where you keep getting the same kind of person in your life trying to show you a certain thing. I'd rather just deal with the muck with the person that's in my life so that I can resolve it and get past it. And instead of having to like get used to somebody else and see their version of the same muck and then have to figure that out. So I don't tend to push people out of my life very easily, but I don't hold on either. I allow the universe to work its magic, you know what I mean, through the relationship and whatever's needed. But I don't know. I find it also fascinating, but it also makes me wonder, you know, I want to talk a little bit about narcissism and, you know, that need for codependency and, or the need for a relationship, because a lot of times, you know, the codependents end up with narcissists, right? And how does that work? And like, what are your experiences with it and how do you navigate that? Because I think so many people are realizing that they've been in relationship or are in a relationship with somebody who's narcissistic, or maybe they even have some narcissistic tendencies of their own or codependent tendencies or whatever it is. And, you know, my understanding is in the healing community, although I know there's both narcissism and codependency, I see a lot more codependency in the healing community. But I definitely see narcissism as well. But I'm just curious your thoughts about it and how do you spot it? First of all, you know, both of those within yourself or others. And then like, how do you navigate through some of that? And then I also have some spiritual parameters I'd like to say around that as well, because I think that it serves a really deep and beautiful purpose. But I'm going to start with Lisa, just because Lisa, your expression is like, what?
Well, no, that I felt like the longer you went on, there was more and more questions kind of buried in there, or layered in there is a better word. So, yeah, narcissism, and I want to caveat this by saying that, of course, working in the counseling field, when you talk about things like narcissism, in the back of my mind is the diagnostic manual. And, you know, that school of thought says that narcissism, unless you're just talking about traits, then it's a personality disorder, which are typically very hard to treat and basically resistant to treatment or to change, let's just say. So if you're a person who's in a relationship with a true narcissist, you know, it's kind of like buckle up because you're in for a rough ride, which may never get a lot better. Narcissism, you know, generally everything is about themselves, even if it doesn't appear to be. So I think sometimes examples are helpful. The question that probably you saw on my face was, how do you know when you spot one? So I go to a gym where I ran into a boyfriend of mine from, you know, many years ago. And we always talk about narcissism because he continually gets involved with these narcissists. But in our conversations, I think it's reminded me how hard it can be to spot the traits, because sometimes traits, just like codependency, it can look like one thing, but when you scratch deeper below the surface, so you might have, for instance, somebody who is trying to save everybody, but if you really look at what the driver is for that behavior, the motivation, you might find that there's some narcissism there because they actually want to feel important. Similarly, with codependency, generally, unless you're talking about the true definition of the word, which is often somebody who's supporting somebody with an illness or something like addiction, now we use codependent, you know, in many settings as just kind of a behavior, an adjective. So that kind of behavior, there can be positives to it, meaning these people are usually, they're very caring. In their mind, they probably have good intentions where they really do want to be helpful. They're concerned. But again, if you scratch beneath the surface of the behavior, there typically is something that they're getting out of that behavior, even if it's just, this makes me feel important. And if I'm helping them, then they won't leave me, because they, like most of us, have abandonment issues. So probably the face I made, because there's so many layers to these questions. And I mean, we could probably spend the rest of our time talking about this question. And I keep curbing myself to not, chatter on forever because I could. It's such a fascinating topic to me. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think good enough for now. Let's keep going though. Karen, what do you have to add?
Well, I haven't yet fully identified what this is for myself, but I think the word narcissism is a little bit like the word love. It's used in many different ways. It's very easy to claim love, but are the actions loving? And I see a lot of women and a lot of groups who have been wounded who throw that term narcissism at every man out there. And women can be narcissists too, but they seem to have really grabbed onto that term. And the minute the man says or does something, and in my mind, sometimes it's even if they're being their masculine selves, we now have the toxic masculinity words and all those things. It's very easy to go, well, you're being a narcissist. But I had to start looking at my own behaviors when I started having some thoughts like that, because my behaviors could be narcissistic too. If somebody gets under my skin the wrong way and I'm overwhelmed and it's a bad day and I have a misunderstanding, if somebody didn't know me, they could think that I was being narcissistic. So I guess, and Lisa, maybe you understand this better than I do. I tend to kind of look for what's the motive. Like what is the motive behind the person's behavior? Because sometimes you can trace really bad behaviors back to the childhood and the messaging that they got in childhood. And you may think you know why they're behaving that way towards you or why you're behaving that way towards someone, but you haven't really, it's just become, because it's been since childhood, it's become this thing. It's just how you respond to this situation. These are the chemicals that get released in your body, and these are the fears that get triggered, and your emotions start talking to your mind. And in human design, we say the mind is nothing but a data recorder. It is not there for decision making. It's there for inspiration, because it lies to us. It tells us things about our feelings that really aren't true. And so in human design, we say that you have a center of authority that is actually your choice voice. And so I feel like sometimes if we become aware, we have a choice about whether we're going to have a behavior that could be seen as narcissistic. That doesn't mean we're a narcissist. I sometimes wonder, and Lisa, maybe you can answer this. Do the narcissists know? Because I wonder, is that a differentiating factor? Like the narcissist doesn't even know they're being a narcissist, where other people kind of know they're being a certain kind of way. Is that a factor in this diagnosis?
I think you make a good point. I think a lot of times it is a behavior that's typically rooted in childhood, is the school of thought. So therefore, it's such a way of being that, talk about blind spots. They think that they're responding to their cues in their environment in a most adaptive way. What is interesting, and this is how it got labeled as resistant to feedback, let's say, is that they might then get to the point that they're getting the feedback from relationships not working out, things like that, but they don't change. And that's typically because, on an unconscious level, they're clinging on so much to this as the behavior that kept them safe in, let's just say, a dysfunctional family. So to let go of that, it's not even something that's considered. It's just like, no, this is the appropriate response. So they don't typically take in the feedback that maybe, like, let's just say the three of us on this call would. Like, that went south. That was strange. Maybe I better look at myself and course correct. They don't really do that because that didn't serve them when they learned the behavior.
So I want to add a little bit to this from a spiritual perspective. Those who know me know I follow some teachings called the Law of One, and there's a whole series of books about it. And one of the things that they talk about in the Law of One is that there's two paths of ascension. There's the positive path and the negative path. And the negative path is really like full of narcissists, basically. It's very self-serving. And they actually ascend through self-service. And so that's how they excel spiritually. And there's this whole process where, really, so the people that you might call evil or whatever, the really dark people, it takes a while to get to that. And what they say is that the average person is kind of like either neutral, they're not really in service to others. If you're looking at on a scale of 0 to 10, most people are around a 4 to a 5. They're either neutral or slightly narcissistic in their tendencies. But if you're even, just over a 5, you're considered positive, like you're moving in the positive. So you might have some narcissistic tendencies, but you're more positive than negative. And so you're moving along the spectrum of positive or negative, right? And I find a lot of codependency in the positive path people. The negative path people tend to not be as codependent. They're more independent, more self-serving in their independence. Not that you won't find independence in the positive path, but what I have seen is it just tends to be a lot more codependent and a lot more martyrdom and things like that, and that positive path of things, because you're trying to be of service to others, but in an unhealthy kind of way. And which takes me back to what Lisa was saying is, well, what are your real emotions there? Your real motivators. Are you just trying to be, loved and get approval? Well, that's still self-serving, right? And so that's where there's a conundrum. But what I often find is I have a lot of people that come to me for energy healing who I would say are more codependent than not, maybe. And not that I can label anybody or anything like that, but just they depend on this person, or they're depending on the outcome, or they're needing something from the situation. And to me, that's codependency. If you need something, you're dependent on it. And the other person is established in exhibiting these narcissistic style behaviors, where it's self-service. I'm going to lie, cheat, and steal, do whatever I got to do to get my way because I have to win. I'm going to say terrible things about you because I need to look like the good person, like just really just awful things that people do sometimes to each other. And, when they come together in a spiritual point of view, when I tune into these relationships that have come to me around all this, it's like they come together to activate each other for their ascension, which is in opposite directions, but they utilize each other to excel in their polarization of their ascension process. So whether it's negative or positive, right? And that it's not about like a judgment or anything like that. So one of the first things I say is, okay, well, you got to get out of judgment. You got to stop thinking that, you're a victim to the situation because in some level you have agreed to this experience. So let's figure out what you're meant to get from it so that you can get activated and then you can be done with the need for this situation. And it really does help people move beyond when they can get that bigger picture idea of the experience. It helps them move beyond the codependency or whatever it is they're needing in relation to this person who they would say is exhibiting narcissistic traits, right? So I wanted to make that clear too, because there is a spiritual purpose for it in your ascension process. We're all here to work on our ascension and our spiritual soul's evolution. And so I just think that's such a dramatic experience. And, there are people who would say collectively we're going through that as well. In the frame of things going on in the earth right now, there is a lot of narcissism. And you look at like political leaders and things like that, and the way things have been handled over the last, how many decades, you start to realize that there's a lot of narcissistic type of people who like power, who like control, who manipulate the system for their own benefit and in spite of others. So in a way, we are collectively going through that experience as well, and it's all for our ascension. So I like to put that out there too.
Yeah, I think it was you that said that to me about, maybe you're supposed to work through this instead. And I think, I don't know, like what I'm noticing is that, we were talking about this, I think last week, Jen, how consciousness seems to be coming in a way that more and more people are kind of waking up to these things. We no longer can just go through life in a system where we kind of trust the structures and we kind of know we can plan, for days, even months, even years ahead. Now we have no idea what we can plan because we don't know what's happening. And so I think that tends to maybe force us to kind of draw in and look a little more at our personal life and our personal relationships, because that stuff out there feels too big. And so I think, at least with the people that I've been talking to, they've been getting more clear on sort of, they don't have all the external things to take their mind off the thing they need to be working on. I guess that's what I'm saying. So we're all kind of waking up and becoming more aware. And I think that anytime there's a relationship issue, until you can stop trying to fix what's wrong with the other person, you're never going to get anywhere. And that's why, to me, that's why I like the human design, because they don't care anything about the other person. There's nothing to do with the other person. It's all about you and your energy. And if you're honoring your own design and energy, then that other person will know you will either be a comfortable place for them or you will be an uncomfortable place for them. Now, obviously, if you're just discovering this when you're already in a relationship that's narcissistic, or there's a codependency or that kind of thing, then there's a lot of unraveling to do. But if you can do this on your own, the relationships that then come to you will change. You will attract what's right for you, in my opinion. And then you may not have to go through so many hardships for that ascension, because it's just you working with your spirit and not incorporating, well, the F, ands, and buts about that other person.
That makes me think of that quote: if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Absolutely.
Well, if I could just share one story, my son is on his way to Whistler in Canada right now to go to school. And he is the type, he is an archetype that they say when parents have a child that's this type, they look at them and go, oh my God, I have to get this thing under control because they're going to burn the planet down. That was my youngest son. And I am a very different design. He is not here to be told what to do. He's here to manifest and to inform other people about what's going to happen. So you can imagine, as a child, it didn't go over well, him informing mom and dad. And I had no idea about this stuff when he was little. So fast forward to, he's a teenager, he becomes belligerent. We have all kinds of problems. He only calls me when he needs something. And if I can't help him, I'm the worst person on the planet. I mean, to the point that I had to cut him off for a few months at various times and go, look, until you can talk to me like a human being, I'm not having these conversations. Call me if you're in big trouble, but we're not going to do this. So I did the whole human design thing, and then I got a lot of light bulb moments, and I went, oh my God, I ruined this trip. I did everything wrong. But instead of telling him anything about it, I did a very simple thing. I learned how I was supposed to speak to a manifester type. If I'm a projector, how am I supposed to talk to him as a child? Well, I missed that opportunity, but I thought, well, I'm going to try it and see if it works with an adult. And it did. It did. It took me about 6 months, and I had to do one very simple thing: just learn to ask him questions and let him tell me what he was going to do. And if I didn't think it was a good idea, don't give him advice. Ask him another question and get him to get there on his own. Now, it's more work, but in this past 3 to 6 months, this child contacts me about everything he wants to do now. He wants my opinion. He allows me to be what I'm designed to be, which is a guide. My role in life is to guide people who invite me to do that. My son, who is now 23, is now inviting me to guide him. And I am like, all because I just changed the way I communicated with him. And then last year, for his birthday, I gave him a chart for his whole thing, and I put our family stuff in there so he could see that the dysfunction in our family, that there was a mechanical reason for it. Nobody did anything wrong. It wasn't personal. It was all energy and the way it was moving. Gave it to him. He goes back to California. I figured he'd put it in a drawer, and maybe when he's 50, he'll read it after I'm gone or whatever. But he called me up 2 weeks later and he said, Mom, and his voice was cracking, and he said, I feel like one of my parents understands me for the first time in my life. And I said, well, that's not my brilliance understanding you, but this is just what I've learned. And so there's real value in learning the design and being able to communicate with people based on their design and what their motors and energies and all that is, because we all want to be seen. And as kids, most of us are not parented by our design. We're parented the opposites. Because, like me, I thought my kid was going to just ruin the planet. And so, I spent all this time trying to keep him caged and shut in. And I completely squashed his creative energy by doing that. And he had to get away from me to get that back. So, learning that as a parent, my point is, it's never too late to learn your design and somebody else's design, and just change how you communicate with them. If they're a generator type, just ask them questions and don't make them think with their mind. Let them think with their motor, their sacral center, and they will come up with the right answers. Otherwise, they'll give you answers that you're like, what the heck is wrong with this person?
Yeah,
So I think it's all very interesting.
it is. All right, well, let's say, you're at this choice point where you're like, do I stay in this relationship or do I go? What are some ways to navigate that process, like, to get to the decision? And then how would you move forward if you're leaving? Like, in what ways in the relationship? I don't mean like anything practical. I mean, just, in the relationship, what do you do to say goodbye to a relationship? Or what do you do to fix and mend it and really try to get the most out of this relationship that you can? I'm going to put that on Lisa.
So again, a lot of questions. I feel like mediation for those people in long-term partnerships can be a really helpful tool. I like the conscious uncoupling, of course, that was made popular by Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin from Coldplay. But it's always a process that I believe starts with tuning in, understanding, that everybody's got a different timetable, and you want to I guess reach a point of clarity or certainty within yourself before you're making these kind of decisions, so you don't walk away from something with regret down the road. um, yeah, I think it's difficult without specific situations because they can vary so greatly. And again, if you're talking about something like addiction, which is worked in most of my career, that is a very difficult one because you look at tough love, not wanting to enable. I think you want to make sure that you're supporting the person, but not, again, bringing in elements of codependency. Um, I don't know. I hear a little bit of an echo. I'm not sure if there's.
It's okay.
So yeah, I think getting clear, and however you need to do that. If you can't do it by going within with your own resources, then having outside help with that process, because like we're all saying, our mind can betray us, and we have our blind spots. We don't see things clearly.
What about you, Karen?
I mean, I think, like Lisa said, there's so many caveats to that, but you have to ask, like, okay, is this a dangerous situation? And in that situation, then that's a whole different animal than I'm not happy, they're not happy, or I'm not happy, they are happy. Now, in those instances, and that's what I see a lot, is they want the relationship, this person doesn't, but the person who doesn't want it is typically not being their authentic self. They are being a version of what this other person wants, and they're afraid to be themselves because, well, if I do, they're going to have a reaction. Well, they just might. But my feeling is that there is nothing, not even a person in this world, that is worth forfeiting your authentic voice, that what you were born with, your purpose and your reason for being on this planet. That's between you, and you can call it God, creator, universe, whatever you want to call it. But there is something there that is our consciousness, and no other person on this earth gets to take that from us. And if we give it to them, it's not their fault. And so in my mind, the first step is to stop worrying about the other person and learn when you should speak and when you should not speak, when you should act, when you should not act. Learn to get emotional clarity. In my mind, if you're in a state of emotions, go to a girlfriend, do whatever. Now, a lot of your girlfriends will,
They
take your
amplify
side.
the problem.
So you have to be careful and understand that your girlfriend is being supportive. They may not be the best person to give you objective advice, especially if the partner doesn't like the girlfriend. And I'm talking it because we're women, but men go through these things too. And then focus on yourself and be who you are. Learn to do that first. And then if the person can accept it, then you may have some grounds for working things out. But if you become who you are and they don't like it, they're probably going to be the one to leave. You may not even have to end up making that decision, which is what happened in my, last marriage, where I just started being who I was. And oh, well, he didn't like that so much. And I think that it always, as we started this off with, and we've all mentioned several times, it always comes back to tuning in to who you are, what your voice is. And then once you know that and you know how to listen for that and separate what is you from what is outside of you, then you can work with another person. Anything other than that, then I don't know. I think it can go all kinds of wrong if you're not listening to your own voice.
Yeah, the only caveat I would say with that is like, there was this saying that we used to say, it's a wounded heart makes for a crappy GPS. And so a lot of people will listen to their wounding and that inner voice, that's that wounded inner child or inner person, or however you want to look at that, and decide to leave a situation that actually could be very good for them if they just stuck it out and worked through the issues, versus or staying in a relationship and not leaving, because they just aren't addressing what needs to be addressed, like if it's a abusive situation.
I'm glad you said that, because I realize some people may hear it that way. When I'm talking about it this way, it's from a human design perspective of learning where your voice comes from. Where is your voice? It's not the wounded voice. That's coming from your emotions in your head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, a lot of people make that, they really do. I'm listening to my feelings and, my truth or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, that's distortion. It's not really truth. It's a distortion. It's a perspective. And you need to get beneath of that to look at the deeper things going on so that you can come to more clarity. Yeah.
We should do a roundtable on that. That's kind of a deep subject about the nuance of the voices that we hear, because it is true. Like, is it coming from the mind? Is it coming from your gut? Is it
or is it the entities all around you? I mean, gosh, you have so many different there's so many that you could go to. I mean, it's like, okay.
No wonder we have multiple personalities.
It's Aunt Patty, and then it's Grandma Mary, and then it's Joe from down the street. And then the not so good ones too, they're around too. So I don't know, but yeah, I do think, a lot of times those distortions do come from others as well. So, when we're in a relationship and we're trying to figure out what to do, we're hearing our mother say things, we're hearing our friends, our girlfriends say things because maybe they don't like a certain aspect about something in that person that we're with. Or, we maybe see them the way they used to be, or, or maybe we don't. Maybe we only see the potential and we're not seeing all the downsides, right? So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot to discuss, and our hour is pretty much up, but I think we touched on a lot, and hopefully are helping some people see some of their blind spots and know that there are answers. They just have to really go deeper within and get support, go to a human design specialist. What'd you call it? A human design?
Well, there's guides and there's analysts. I am not an analyst. I'm a guide.
Your guide.
So I guide people to kind of learn what their design is, what their strategy and authority is, and how to listen to that voice, and how to figure out what fear centers are activated in them, and also what their life theme purpose is. That is something people will express no matter what relationship, what career path. They're going to express that throughout their life, no matter what.
Awesome. And then Lisa, going to somebody who is a relationship coach, has experience in counseling, and can really help you navigate in a healthy way your mind and emotions around a lot of these things. Or a spiritual healer too, like someone like me or someone else. There's plenty of us out there, where you dive in deep to the spiritual concepts and to figure out what's going on in that realm of things. And so I just think, there's so much help out there. And so if any of you out there are struggling with relationships, trying to figure out, where are you going wrong? Why do you have this pattern? How do you navigate through a difficult one? Or is it time to get out or not? There's a lot of convoluted questions in all of that, right? And no one single answer for any of it, but there is a way through, and there is an overarching purpose for it all. So we just hope that you come to at least that awareness of the overarching purpose, and then you can navigate a little bit easier. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining, and let us know if you need anything. Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.